Thanks, Brian. All right, let's get started, everybody. I'm thrilled to welcome you to our October 20th, 2022 Urban Forestry Commission meeting. Vivek Shandis, he, him, his, as going to chair this meeting and the commission until, as we'll talk about later, February. So keeping in mind that we have a agenda that's going to bring together a lot of discussion about sustainable futures as well as our priorities. I love to have us have a conversation about priorities. There are two main things really want to get into with that, namely community and the priority of community engagement that we've narrowed down to, and keep in the back of your mind also the structure of the UFC and what that might look like. So that's going to be coming up. I'm very excited that we were able to set aside 45 minutes for that conversation. I have some questions I'm going to lead with on that, but really want to kind of kick up some creative and constructive thoughts on that topic. In the meantime, I'd like to open it up to public comments as we get started here. Brian, do we have anyone signed up?
Yeah, so the first, David Judkins has signed up, and David is actually, not everyone may know this, but we do provide in-person accommodation. So David is at the Portland building in a room that we've set up with to have Zoom access. So first time we've done this, so I'm hoping this will work. David, I've let you in to speak. I hope you are able to hear us and we're able to hear you.
Looks like there's a public comment window open.
Yeah, that should be David. If this doesn't
I have
work,
to be unmuted, Brian.
and David may not be able to unmute. We might need to go into the next public comment. I might need to run down there and help deal with some of the issues there. Sorry, first time we're doing this.
It's good. It does look like that's Fifth Avenue right behind you, Brian. So it does look like you're on downtown.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, we can go on to the second public comment. Let's see here, and then I will run down there.
Okay.
All right, and Ashley, yeah, I'm gonna make you co-host, and I will get the next public comment set, then I'll run this here. So then, let's see here, Kelly Felice is here as well, so I'm gonna bring them into the meeting.
Hi, how's it going? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Felice, thanks. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for taking public comment. My name is Felice Kelly, and I'm a volunteer with 350 PDX. We really appreciate the work of the Urban Forestry Commission. We really want to see the vision of growth in Portland's tree canopy and equitable shade development that was outlined in the 2018 Equitable Tree Planting Strategy. And our group has read that document pretty carefully. And we think that a lot of the planning there really outlines where the city needs to go. And in that document, there was an indication that there'd be an implementation report in 2019. So we were wondering if that report was ever compiled. And if not, could we make a request that a report be compiled now so the public knows what parts of that strategy have been accomplished and what remains to be done?
Thanks, Felice. Do we have a response to that? Jen?
Sure, and as I'm sure all you commissioners will recall, Felice, thanks for that question. We did that report and we update it annually. It is online, so it's kind of continuously available and tracking. We will put that link in the chat for you so you can find it right on the
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Great.
Okay, the next on the list we have is Nora. Nora Lehman there, so I'm gonna bring Nora in.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Nora, welcome. Yes, we can.
Hi, thanks for taking public comment this morning. I'm just commenting as a regular citizen today. I care a lot about Portland's trees and I pay a lot of attention to them as I go about the city in my daily life with my 2 small children. And I really want to see our urban forest expanding and thriving. I'm concerned that the trees we've been used to planting here are not going to be appropriate for our future climate faster than we may have thought, starting, in 2030 and beyond. I mean, already we're seeing such long, hot, dry summers. And in my observations, many species that are on the approved planting list are already not thriving. As an example, I see many struggling or dying katsura trees around the city. I also see dogwoods and crabapples really not doing well, just absolute dried up sticks, really sad, scorched leaves. And given, trees' potential for lifespans of many decades and our goal of growing the shade canopy, I'm really concerned that many of the approved trees that are being planted now are going to struggle to survive in 2030, let alone 2040 and beyond, when we're going to need a larger, more robust and more drought tolerant canopy than ever. So I'm sure this is something that you all are well cognizant of, but I just wanted to weigh in as a citizen, and I would love to learn more about the planning to keep updating those approved street tree planting lists, and also what enforcement is involved, because I do see when development goes in, like just random trees. I'm still seeing trees that are not approved, like Bradford pears, like getting thrown in there, and nobody seems to do anything about it. So thank you very much for taking my comment.
Thanks a lot, Nora. Really insightful observations that you have around what's going on in the city. It's definitely something of relevance to the commission that we're talking about as well. Jen, I see your hand up. Response?
Yeah, before I respond, I wonder if any commissioners want to respond, because my guess is you know a lot about what we do in terms of approved street tree lists and also enforcement of the city's planting requirements. Anyone want to take a stab on it before I go into it?
Yeah, Bruce?
I think the street tree list is reviewed every couple of years. Nick Desai led the most recent effort. So I haven't heard any time frame as to when it will be reviewed again, but when that happens, it's somewhat open to the public, I believe. I'm not exactly clear on that, but what I would suggest is that Nora contact Nick Desai with her concerns and ask him specifically about the procedure he's going to be following, I think. Yeah, I think that's it. On enforcement, that is a challenge. Urban forestry doesn't have as much control over development situations as would be needed, I'd say.
Thank you, Bruce. I'll add a little to that. Yes, we do update that list, Nora, every 3 years on a cycle, rather than sending it to an individual staffer, because sometimes we have to switch who's working on that. Please send it to trees@portlandoregon.gov. That's the city's single point of contact for all tree communications. And they'll get somebody to get back to you on that, usually within 3 business days. But indeed, we are looking at climate is changing rapidly. Habitat for trees is getting, in general in the city, much more challenging and limited. And so we're consistently reviewing and updating those lists every 3 years. And in terms of enforcement, Bruce is right, not all tree code enforcement is urban forestry's to do. However, street tree planting is, and when the new tree code was implementation started in 2015, very few resources came with that implementation. So we've been building capacity over the years. And thanks to the parks levy that Portland voters unanimously approved last fall, I think that was, we're just in the process of hiring someone who will supervise a compliance and enforcement unit, which we have not had for the tree code. And in the next couple of years, we anticipate and want to have more follow-up on things like tree planting requirements and other code requirements that we just haven't had the people to do in the past. So thanks for asking those questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for caring for these trees, Nora. It looks like public comment is available, and
Yeah, can you hear us?
yes,
Fantastic. All right, I'll let David provide his comment.
thanks,
Can
David.
you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, good.
Welcome.
Chairman Shandas and Urban Forestry Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is David Judkins. I'm a resident of the Rose City Park neighborhood in Northeast Portland. I'm a member of the Policy Subcommittee of the Urban Forestry Commission. However, I'm not here as a spokesman on behalf of any organization, but as an informed private citizen. The issue I wish to address is street tree maintenance, or more accurately, the lack of street tree maintenance in the city of Portland. I have participated in Portland Parks and Recreation street tree inventories, and my teams found that the condition of most street trees was only fair. We saw little evidence of pruning. In the city of Portland, the care of street trees is solely the responsibility of the adjacent property owner. Property owners may not recognize or be indifferent to unhealthy and dangerous conditions of trees under their care. Understandably, these property owners are reluctant to schedule an inspection by a qualified arborist because of the cost, potentially many thousands of dollars more to remedy a dangerous situation. Property owners, especially in lower income areas, are often reluctant to plant trees because of the future costs of their maintenance. Neglect of trees results in loss of their effectiveness, temperature regulation, carbon sequestration, pollution removal, and stormwater absorption, and reduces their life expectancy. Importantly, unhealthy trees are safety hazards. A falling tree or limb can damage property and kill an individual in its path. In my immediate neighborhood, 2 large trees had fallen. Fortunately, there were no casualties. A few summers ago, a large limb suddenly fell from a tree onto the sidewalk where a few seconds earlier had been walking. Near-death experience. The Urban Forestry Division plans to inspect city trees every 10 years, as I understand. A similar schedule should be applied to street trees. Should property owners shoulder the cost of tree inspection and maintenance? Many cities, including New York City, assume that responsibility includes street tree maintenance in their budgets. The topic of street tree maintenance has been discussed in other contexts, but it has not been given sufficient attention. There has been mention of pilot programs in selected areas, but deteriorating street trees are a citywide and continuing problem that will only worsen with time as the trees age. I request the commission create a task force or request the Urban Forestry Division to form one that would address street tree maintenance. Specifically, would identify the steps necessary for the city to take over street tree maintenance and identify potential sources of funding. It would seek partners to ramp up resident support for such a drastic change. It would propose an inspection schedule and define what maintenance would include, such as inspection, pruning, removal, replacement, and who would do what. Thank you for your attention.
great. Thank you, David. Really poignant conversation that we're going to be getting into quite a bit more. Commissioners, any response? Or Jen, Brian, other city staff?
Sure. Yes, thank you so much for the comment. And we have indeed been trying to change that policy for all the reasons you mentioned, David. And we're hopeful now, especially with today's presentation at Council on Sustainable Future. That is a vehicle that the city is looking at to try to identify that kind of funding to change that responsibility to a city-backed responsibility for street tree maintenance. So if you want to stick around today, you might hear more about how that's being undertaken. And we are also looking currently, as my report will talk a little bit about, at new funding sources that we're seeing at the federal level, perhaps to do pilot programs around city-backed street tree maintenance, so no longer having it being a burden and barrier on adjacent property owners. So we're all with you.
Yeah, I see Megan's hand up.
Yeah, Jen spoke to a couple of points I was going to make. I know that there's a concerted effort both in our PSEF comment letter that we just made and with the Sustainable Futures. But one thing maybe we could revisit is I did appreciate David's comment about kind of the commission maybe having a temporary sub task force, whatever we want to call it, just to continue to think about how we can, as a commission, take a more active role in moving this forward. I know it's such a priority, so maybe to not lose that thread of David's comment, I wanted to kind of just put a pin in that.
Thanks, Megan. I made a note of exactly that I want to come back to as we're talking about priorities today. I know this issue has been long-standing for the commission. It's really, as I testified yesterday to City Council about the irony between, planting trees and then kind of potentially burdening the adjacent property owner with the financial costs of caring for those trees. So yeah, it's an ongoing challenge that we're well aware of. Really appreciate your observation and recommendation with this, and we'll be coming back to this. Thanks again, David, for your comment. Other comments, Brian? Anybody else? Or Ashley, I mean?
No one else signed up ahead of time.
Okay.
But yeah, if anyone in attendance wants to provide a public comment, they can raise their hand and then Ashley can let them in. But I don't think we have any more.
Yeah, we're pretty tight with time here too, so I want to make sure we have time for all the other things.
I don't
Great.
see any hand raised, so I think we're good to move on, Vivek.
And I will note for those of you who didn't have a chance to comment or those generally interested in comment, there are multiple ways to be able to engage the commission and staff on concerns, questions, observations that you have, and by email certainly is one way to do it. And sending that directly, I think, to Brian Lando, who's here, and Brian's information is on the Urban Forestry website. You can reach out to trees@portlandoregon.gov as well. So lots of different places to provide comments, so the commission gets all of those. Let me switch now to minutes. We have September and August minutes. I'd like to ask commissioners if I can get a motion to approve minutes, or if there are any amendments, friendly amendments to make, any edits, corrections, now would be the time. Brian sent those out earlier this week.
I want to abstain from September because I was gone then, but my name is incorrect in that September minute.
Oh, good, thank
I
you.
could correct that.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Right. Okay, anybody? The motion? One correction?
I move to pass the minutes with one correction.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. A second? This is both September and August is what the motion is for, Adrian, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Second? Bruce, seconds? Okay, I'm gonna call a vote then. All in favor of passing both September and August minutes with the motion of correction, virtual or physical hand? All right. Any noes? Nays? Any abstentions? Okay, Megan and Melinda abstaining. Okay, so moved. Thank you. Thank you all. Great, we can post those up and ready to go. I'd like to turn it over to Jen for Urban Foresters report. Welcome back to town, Jen and Daniel, by the way, if you are back in town.
Yes, recently arrived, so to speak, but thank you. And I'll speak to that a little bit, and maybe Vivek and Daniel will as well. But again, good morning. Great to see you all. As usual, the weather is changing, isn't it? Which is my first little point for today. And my report for you is we are indeed in forestry preparing for the winter weather season. We actually have a meeting later today with our colleagues in the Bureau of Transportation to really get coordinated about responding when we have tree emergencies in streets, public streets in the city. Urban Forestry is the 24/7 first responder for the city for tree issues in rights of way and on city-owned properties. So as a reminder to everyone, when the wind blows or there's ice or you see something that looks dangerous, please call 823-TREE, 503-823-TREE, which is 8733, so that our arborists can get out there and make things safe and take care of those trees. Second item, it is also planting season or the beginning of planting season. It's well underway for us. All 2,000 of the trees for the yard tree giveaway have pretty much been claimed by now. We have a total of 6 weekend giveaway events, primarily in East Portland, because of course that is where we are focusing our planting efforts according to Growing a More Equitable Forest, the city's planting strategy. And we're also starting planting another 1,500 or so street trees this season in our very focused opt-out program in East Portland in low canopy and low income neighborhoods. And 100% of those street trees that we're planting that way with the permission of the adjacent property owners have been in those priority neighborhoods. Third item, Arbor Day. Portland Arbor Day is October 29th, fast approaching. That's next weekend. You will get information, commissioners, by email about that with details and times and things that are important for the event. If you could come, that would be fantastic. It's really a celebratory day. We have partner organizations who will be there, of course, with us, all celebrating trees and kicking off the planting season. And part of the day will also be learning about tree planting. And that's especially important for volunteers who work with us, who will be leading others in planting this winter in volunteer planting work. Third item, last week, our Title 11 amendment package was approved by City Council. So that's a lot of work. Yeah, for all of us, thank you so much, commissioners, for your input, review, repeated comments on those, and really improving the content of those amendments. Also, of course, thank you to Brian, Nick Desai, and Rick Faber, who were our 3 key leaders in urban forestry and starting that process, gosh, over a year ago now. But they're the ones who really got it there on behalf of all of us in Portland's trees. You may recall that that project, the technical amendment project, was phase 1 of a series of 3 phases. So now that phase 1 is complete, yay, check. We're focusing on phase 2, which is updating the city's urban forest management plan. The current plan dates from 2004, which is quite a while ago, and is supposed to be updated every 10 years. So as you all know and care about, we're really excited about getting that management plan updated. And in our November meeting, we're planning on having our key staff who are leading that process on the agenda to talk with you commissioners about the commission's role in that project and what type of things you think should be in the scope of work for the project. So that's already beginning. The third phase, you may recall, is more substantive tree code amendments. And they were sequenced in that order so that an updated urban forest management plan can inform whatever amendments are then needed to Title 11 trees, the city's tree code. Also, yesterday, the legislative changes, so the structural changes to the Portland Clean Energy Fund came to City Council. Thank you, commissioners, for all your work on the letter that you prepared and was submitted. And Vivek, I understand you also gave testimony, so thank you for your leadership on the commission, as well as your outstanding research on the topic. And I'm sure that was very impactful for council. Next, it will move to a vote next week. That's the process that City Council usually uses. The first agenda item is more of a hearing and discussion, and then at the second week is the vote on that content. Streets 2035, the so-called city master plan for how our streets are designed, including having space for trees, continues. However, I don't have any updates for you on that. There haven't been any changes lately in that project, which again is led by the city's Bureau of Transportation. We kind of already covered the street tree maintenance update, thanks, I think, to David's comment. So today's Sustainable Future presentation with Sarah Huggins hopefully will be helpful and informative on that and have good discussion around that. We continue to pursue changing that policy, which really starts with finding funding. And of course, we have the estimates for that thanks to our work with a consultant just a couple of years ago. Another item, I have just 3 more. Yes, I got to participate in a special retreat and conference for 3 days, ended yesterday. And thank you, Daniel. Daniel attended with me representing the Forestry Commission, as well as a nonprofit in our community. You all know that Daniel is the executive director of the Johnson Creek Watershed Council. And also from Portland, Patricia Diefendorfer, who is the senior planner in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, came with us as well to this retreat. It was in Colorado, and it was an invitation intensive on equity-centered urban forestry opportunities, especially with the new funding that's coming from the federal level. And it was folks from across the country, about 40 attendees. There were the 5 vanguard cities. We were called, Portland is one of those. Philadelphia was represented, the Chicago area, Cleveland was also represented. And then what are called the Front Range communities, which is the Boulder and Denver area in Colorado. A lot of researchers were there from different institutions, including Vivek. He attended with some of his research findings and questions, Forest Service representatives as well, and also some funders like the Kaplan Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation were there. So it was a really exciting and intensive discussion among practitioners, urban foresters, and community partners on what we should be doing next, how to organize to leverage the new funds that are becoming available. And we came out of that with some really good ideas that we'll be continuing to pursue through a consortium structure. I wanted to make room for Daniel, if you wanted to say anything about that, and then maybe Vivek.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to attend. I got a lot out of it. I made sure I asked someone from every one of those cities, how are you paying for street tree maintenance? So I did learn quite a bit, and before I get too far away in time, I want to write up some of my thoughts and things I learned and send it out to everyone, because it's really interesting how approaches are very different on the funding issue and doing street tree maintenance and other issues. I would also mention, Jen, that there were really 2 main tracks of focus here. Equity was one, but climate change and adapting for climate change and climate change resilience was a huge piece. It was really learned a lot, got some good contacts. But one thing we talked a lot about was this big federal funding that's coming down. I think something like $1.5 billion are coming through the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically for urban forestry through I think the Forest Service is the agency that's going to be distributing it. But I think there's a really good potential role here if the city of Portland, perhaps working on a big grant application with other municipalities as well, maybe by themselves, I don't know. But anyway, to bring in some of this money. But the thing about this money, like so much of the other money, it's like this one-time thing. And if we're going to be talking about street tree maintenance, we have to come up with a long-term funding plan. But the thing is that this money is a one-time thing. It would be a shame if we weren't able to somehow leverage some of it. And with everything going on with PSEF, and this is just my opinion, but I would love to see the city of Portland take that leap and say, we don't know long-term how we're going to fund all the street tree maintenance, but there's so much potential money right now. Let's go ahead and make the code changes, make it the responsibility of the city. And we probably have about a good 10 years of funding, and just say that it's such a priority for us that we are going to figure out how to fund that long-term, even though for these first number of years, we will have money. That's just my opinion. But I do want to share some of my what I learned from some of the other cities. So thank you.
Thanks, Daniel, for attending. It was a lot of time, and your participation was so helpful. And yeah, thanks for your comments. Vivek, did you want to say anything about that event and your role in it or anything like that?
Yeah, just 3 words. Workforce development. Actually, that's probably 2 words. So 4 words: workforce development, climate, and funding. Like those were 3 things in the little time I got to participate that really came through loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you. Other key phrases that everyone in that room was working on and had different experiences with, so we're all learning from each other and building on that. It was very collaborative, is the way it should be. But other things are really about design and regulation and incentives. Those were key parts of the discussion as well. And also the idea of restoring nature as one of the primary needs to address the climate crisis, including urban forests. So more to come on that. And I was really pleased that we have some concrete things we're working on going forward, with commitments made by various cities and people, including myself, to keep going on those. I'm running out of time, so just a couple other things, and I'll skip some for now. Recruitment update for the Forestry Commission. Interviews are being conducted. There is a robust applicant pool, which is wonderful to see. And thank you to Vivek and Roberta. Roberta couldn't be with us today, but they have been involved in the interviews with Brian. And we're really looking forward to having some great candidates come out of there. It's kind of an applicant pool, the quality and size of which I don't remember having seen before. So it's really exciting. And let's see, I already covered that. Our December meeting, I mentioned some content for the November Urban Forestry Commission meeting. The December meeting, we are expecting to have some Bureau of Planning and Sustainability staff come and talk with you commissioners about climate action planning. So the 5-year climate action plan updates, which of course is very much related to trees in the city and the urban canopy. That concludes my report. If anyone has any questions or requests for future City Forestry Report content, please let me know.
Just a quick note, Jen, in that BPS update on climate action planning, would be great if they could kind of, it goes maybe without saying, but like present at least some material on what they see as the role of trees in that process, the role of urban forests, and maybe aspects of the urban forest management plan that might really dovetail well with that work.
Thanks, Vivek. Thank you.
Other commissioners, thoughts, responses? Okay. All right. I think we're in time. Sarah, welcome. We're we're looking forward to your update. We have about 45 minutes set aside, or 40 minutes set aside here for you. And if there's specific things, hey, welcome, Todd. If there's specific things that you would like feedback on, love to hear that up front. And then we'll keep that in mind as you kind of set up this presentation. Do you have slides to share as well?
I do. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And let me get it into the slideshow. All right, are folks seeing the slides?
Yes, that's good.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Sarah Huggins. I'm our Bureau's Sustainable Future Program Manager, and I'm here with Todd Lofgren, who's our Bureau's Deputy Director. Hi, everyone. So this morning, I am going to give sort of a status update. I did come to your September commission meeting as well. And at that meeting, I presented sort of some information about our funding needs overall as a Bureau. I also gave you an update on Director Long's convening of a ballot initiative task force. And we also started talking about some funding options that we reviewed with that task force. So today, as I said, I'll give sort of a status update in the past month. I will do just a brief recap of our funding position, so it's fresh in all of our minds. And then I'd like to get your input on kind of our funding category values and timing as we move forward with this effort, and then also get your input and answer any questions about 7 of the 12 initial funding options that are most likely to be considered further. So in September, the Ballot Initiative Task Force wrapped up their final meeting and had a great discussion. They shared their input with Director Long, including an exercise where each individual shared which funding options they thought should be prioritized for sort of near-term pursuit, longer-term pursuit, or deprioritized. And thank you to Daniel Newberry for serving on that Ballot Initiative Task Force and providing your input. This summer and fall, we've also prepared, and the Office of Government Relations within the city submitted an initial issue paper for a potential state statute change that would allow a city council to be the governing body of a Parks and Recreation district, which, if approved by city council as part of the legislative agenda, would move forward for consideration in the 2023 state legislative session. I'll talk a little bit later more about sort of what that means and why we did that. And then we'll also have some opportunities to talk about our financial position with City Council over the coming months. So the next point will be when we share our first Parks Levy annual report with Council on October 26th. And then again, as part of a January City Council work session about asset condition and funding citywide, which is a great work session for our Bureau to be a part of, because addressing the $500 million and growing deferred maintenance gap is an area of critical funding need. And Director Long and Commissioner Rubio are taking all of the feedback that they're hearing in these conversations, including feedback we received from you today, and they're going to be considering and exploring options over the coming months. So without further ado, let's dive in. So I shared the same information about our funding position last time at your September meeting, but again, I want to just briefly talk through so it's fresh in all of our minds as we dive in. So the Bureau is working towards achieving a sustained annual funding level in today's fiscal year 23 dollars of around $235 million. And that would be, that could be increased if we looked at faster expansion of our park system to meet equity gaps. It could also be increased if we looked at adding either citywide street tree maintenance or a pilot project for street tree maintenance. On kind of the top band in the operating row, it includes a need of about $139 million to achieve the service levels that we're currently providing with support from the Parks Levy, which is providing about 1/3 of the Bureau's operational funding for fiscal year 23. And the other 2/3 largely comes from the city's general fund, but also some other revenue sources. So fiscal year 26 would be the last year that the Bureau would receive Parks Levy revenues under the current voter-approved 5-year term, which means we'd need to pursue renewal or replacement of the Parks Levy on or before 2025 to avoid significant service reductions in all areas of parks, including all of our urban forestry supported operations. On capital maintenance, kind of the green band, we are looking to target about $60 million of investment annually. And we currently receive an ongoing commitment of about $4.6 million from our general fund. But due to sort of the amount of assets that we are responsible for in the city, we need about $55 million more to reach an industry good practice level of investment, which would be 3% of kind of the value of those assets. And in kind of our previous discussion in September, I shared that the magnitude of that backlog has really grown over time. And it does mean that we are going to be in a position to be closing assets about 1 in 5 over the next 15 years if we can't begin to close that gap. But we also shared, how quickly we could begin to reduce that backlog if we had additional capital maintenance investment. So preventing asset failure and adequately maintaining our system is a priority. On capital growth, that third band down, we're looking for about $36 million a year, which we actually largely anticipate is going to be covered by future forecasted system development charge revenues, accompanied by some grants and donations. And with those resources, we could, with additional resources and those, we could make faster progress filling in equity gaps. For example, bringing up East Portland to match the citywide average for walkability to a park or natural area. And newly acquired and improved parks and natural areas are opportunities to increase tree canopy as well. And then street tree maintenance. So I heard some conversation earlier in your meeting about street tree maintenance, which is great. And we are looking at that, as Jen mentioned. So the estimate to provide that citywide was $20 million annually. And we've definitely, in our previous discussion, discussed the inequities of today's distribution of tree canopy and that the cost of maintenance is a barrier, especially for low-income households, to adding street trees. So in addition to kind of the idea of citywide street tree maintenance, which we're continuing to include in this effort, we could also explore adding street tree maintenance in a more targeted way. So utilizing an equity lens and focusing on lowest canopy areas. And especially for the idea of potentially a more targeted pilot, there might be additional funding opportunities than sort of the ballot initiative opportunities that we're looking to fund the rest of these areas as a whole. So that's where we are today. Skipping forward, this next slide looks at fiscal year 26-27, so 5 years from now, which would actually be 1 year after the current 5-year levy term. So in that year, operating is where we would see the most significant change in the forecast. If we don't have a successor resource for the parks levy, there will be a significant new operating funding gap and resulting service declines across the Bureau. And for anyone who is a fan of charts more than tables, this is that same information, but in chart form. Solid colors at the bottom indicate the funding that we anticipate we would have, and those dashed lines indicate where we have funding gaps forecasted for each of those categories. So last time we shared a version of kind of a 5-year timeline with you, and we modified it a bit based on the discussions we've had over the last couple of months. So we've definitely heard from many that maintaining our system and addressing the deferred maintenance backlog, preventing asset closures, retaining service levels we have is critical to prioritize. That's kind of that green circle of capital maintenance. And we've also heard providing an equitable park system is equally critical. That's kind of the blue circle there. And we've placed these two in an early position on the timeline with an eye towards looking at how all of our funding opportunities could potentially work together to advance addressing both of these categories. And when we're talking about capital, I'll note that tree planting is an eligible capital project. So tree planting can be part of those buckets as we think about them. And we've also heard that ensuring our operational services is critical. So this would mean a plan to either renew the levy or have a successor resource in place in 2025 or before 2025. That's that orange circle on the screen there. And with street tree maintenance, to date, we've heard the strongest interest in looking at how to start this potentially not as a citywide scale, but as a pilot project that we could learn from. That would be a more targeted project, as I mentioned, potentially using an equity lens and looking at the lowest canopy, lowest income areas. And here, this is that sort of green tree circle on the map. Here, I think, as I mentioned, street tree maintenance, planting can be in sort of the 2 capital buckets, maintenance can be in the orange bucket, but I think there are also additional opportunities beyond the ballot measures that we're going to be talking about later to fund potentially a street tree maintenance pilot project. So some of the ideas I know have been talked about in this group, include PSEF funding, federal funding opportunities, and more. So I think there's potentially more opportunity that could move forward for that particular category. So I want to pause here before we dive into what the funding options are that we're looking at, and just get your feedback on how this reflects sort of your understanding of the overall Bureau need and how it might be reflected on a timeline of priority.
Hey, Sarah, just a quick clarification. Is that 20 million for street tree maintenance based on the report that was produced? I think it was by Davy Tree, commissioned by the city. Or is that where that number comes from?
That's where it initially came from, and we've escalated it since that report was a few years old. So that's where the 20 million came from. Okay. And that was, Jen or Brian, feel free to jump in, but I believe the assumptions behind that was getting street tree maintenance on a 5-year cycle was the number we used, and then again escalated.
Yeah, that's. I was gonna say, yeah, that's correct. It was that is based on the 10-year pruning cycle. I'm sorry, 5-year pruning cycle. So it's sort of the, best case scenario. It also includes money for proactive planting, because the idea being, with the city assuming that responsibility, we would be able to plant more street trees as we're relieving that cost burden. So it's a bit of a fully loaded scenario.
Yeah, and I'll add to that a couple things. It also includes a workforce development component and some basics of how implementation would play out and what it would take to start to implement. And also, Vivek, just to be clear, Davie Resource Group was the consultant on this. However, we had a staff team that worked very hard and closely with Davie on it. So it's really a joint report. And as Sarah mentioned, we've been updating it since.
Great. Bruce, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted clarification. Sarah, you said the trees could be planted as part of, I don't know if it was capital maintenance or capital growth. And I know supposedly trees are not considered a depreciating asset of the city. And so I was a little confused by how you said they could be considered for funding in either one of those capital areas.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. So currently, we have been including trees in capital projects when we build out new facilities. When we build new parks, they include trees, and that's part of kind of the blue circle of continuing to expand our parks. We've also had some conversations, though, with our city's sort of debt group about capitalization of trees and whether trees could be included, for example, in bond measures. And so, potentially not as an individual tree planted, but if we looked at grouping tree plantings into larger planting projects, that sort of project could also be eligible as a capital project.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioners? All right, Sarah, green light, keep going.
Okay. There we go. Perfect. So at our last meeting, we briefly had a chance to talk through a list of about a dozen funding options that we were discussing. And we also shared a list of fees, grants, donations, other funding sources that wouldn't really include, a ballot measure, which we are also going to continue pursuing. But for sort of the order of magnitude and the large buckets, we're really looking at taxes that would be ballot measures. And so for all of those, we, again, last time shared some criteria that we use to walk through. And as I walk us through the funding options tonight, I'm going to be using that criteria to orient the discussion. So here's the list that we talked with you about last time. And based on initial feedback, 7 of the 12 that I've got here in bold at the top of the list are ones that are likely to get further continued consideration. And the ones that are at the bottom of the list in lighter gray, either we're currently preempted from utilizing, so that would be the real estate excise tax because of state law, or otherwise don't seem as viable for further consideration. So I'm going to be focusing on the 7 that are at the top of the list to talk through today. So this first one is a general obligation bond, and that one might seem pretty familiar. Parks and other entities are pretty consistently and regularly used general obligation bonds to fund capital projects. And the most recent Parks General Obligation Bond is the 2014 replacement bond. So the first thing to notice, kind of unique to everything that we're going to talk about today, general obligation bonds are limited to funding capital projects. They can be used for capital maintenance and capital growth. They could be a great option for those funding gaps, but they wouldn't be an appropriate sustainment source for levy operating revenues. The size of bonds is limited by city policy and also state law. And the city currently has an available debt capacity of about $1 billion citywide. A 60 to 80 cent bond rate could get us to a point where we're actually meeting our capital maintenance target. and it could buy down the deferred maintenance backlog within about 15 years. Bonds could also be issued in a series. So like the 2014 Parks Replacement Bond, which didn't raise taxes and instead replaced an older bond. We don't really have that option now, but a new bond measure could look at how to structure, we could discuss how to structure it for potentially taking it to voters for renewal of a new series. And then unlike some two other tax alternatives, property tax ones that we're going to talk about shortly, bonds don't have any compression, so they don't reduce the collection of other city or county tax collections. They're really outside of that structure. With bonds, voters approve the amount, and the rate is set annually to fund the associated debt service. So towards the bottom of the list, volatility and kind of the growth rate of that as a funding source doesn't really come into play. So we currently have a local option levy. We just wrapped up year 1 out of 5 of that levy, and it's currently an 80-cent levy per $1,000 of assessed value. And we're estimating it'll raise an average of $48 million a year for 5 years, which again is about a third of our operating. Operational local option levies like ours can only be enacted by voters for a maximum of 5 years, though voters can choose to renew them. And we have seen renewals locally. The children's levy has been in place with renewals for about 20 years. And prior to becoming a district in 2012, the Multnomah County Library was supported by a series of operating levies for almost 30 years. For local option levies, you'll see it takes a slightly higher rate than a special district to raise the same amount of funds. And that's because local option levies are the first to be compressed or affected by other funding measures. Permanent rate levies, like a special district, are compressed next. So it's important to remember that local option levies don't compress special districts, but special districts do compress local option levies. And as with the special district, volatility is pretty low due to the steady growth in assessed values, property values. But a pronounced decline in market values, similar to a Great Recession, would impact a local option levy to a greater degree than a permanent rate like a special district. And then with regard to who pays local option levies and special districts as property taxes, both are a bit regressive in that they impact lower income property owners at a higher proportion than higher income property owners. So a special district is also a bit unique among the funding options that we looked at for a couple of reasons. So first, it's the only alternative that actually changes the governance model, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. And then the second, the creation of a special district doesn't inherently include an associated tax rate. So voters could actually approve a special district with no revenue stream and no budget, or with voter approval, a district could have a permanent maximum rate and also put its own additional funding options like future bonds or other taxes and fees in place. A pretty key difference between a special district and the other property tax alternatives, bond and levy, is that it's permanent. So this was a pretty key consideration, for example, for Multnomah County Library District when it formed, replacing decades of temporary levies with a permanent district rate. Special districts, though, do generate pretty significant compression on other districts and local governments. So in the example of 90 cents per $1,000 of assessed value, which would raise about $55 million annually, other taxing jurisdictions, including the county, the children's levy, and metro, would lose about $8.6 million annually. So spending a little bit more time explaining kind of the governance question, state law allows for the creation of special taxing districts through county referrals to voters for approval. And that kind of district would either have its own governance structure with sort of separately elected board members, or like the library district, it could be governed by the county commission if it was located solely within one county. But without a change in state law, a city council would not be able to serve as the governing board of a special parks district. And in 2019, when we had a work session with City Council, Commissioner Fish noted that for a special district to be considered, he recommended pursuing a change in state law so that a city council could be the governing body. This is actually similar to what Seattle did. They changed the Washington statutes and later formed a park district with the Seattle City Council serving as the governing body. The council kind of convenes for city business, and then they convene again for park district business. In that structure, employees and facilities were retained by the city, but there's kind of a permanent guaranteed revenue source set aside for specific outlined services for the Parks District to provide. And Seattle actually also signed an agreement with the Parks District to guarantee it'll continue receiving its share of general fund resources so they could ensure more sustainable funding levels. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we've done in accordance with prior council feedback was propose for consideration a state legislative item for the 2023 session that could make the city council governance an option in Oregon, just like it is in Washington and like Oregon currently allows for counties. So we've seen a few different ballot measures that include local income taxes passed recently. The Metro Income and Business Tax in November 2020. And just a reminder, that's kind of a 1% on income for households with income over $200,000 or $125 for single filers, plus 1% for businesses with gross receipts of $5 million more a year. We also saw the Multnomah County Preschool for All also passed in November 2020, which also taxes single filers over $125,000 and households above $200,000 of 1.5%, and then single filers with income above $250,000 and households with income above $400,000 at 3%. So both of those are kind of examples of higher earner income taxes. And within the city of Portland, we also have two forms of income taxes, which are the arts tax and the business license tax. So several years ago, the city looked at a tax on the top 2% of earners, which were those earning incomes in Portland over $240,000 for single filers and $480,000 for joint filers, with rates between 1.5% and 3%. And the higher rates were for the higher income brackets. Escalating that, we would estimate potentially $70 to $90 million in annual revenues. Oh. I will note, though, that revenues could be significantly higher, and we will hopefully pretty soon have a better idea what actuals could be once the preschool collections are finalized. And then, you know, of course, pursuit of an income tax really depends on how it would be structured, who the tax applies to, but it could have the potential to be a pretty progressive tax in terms of who pays. Several communities in Oregon have implemented prepared food and beverage taxes, including Ashland, Yachats, and more recently Cannon Beach. They all have 5% food and beverage taxes, and a 5% tax is scaled to sort of Portland, could potentially generate over $90 million annually. Generally, growth rates have been around 4% for this type of tax, although I will note that COVID had a really big impact, which made their volatility pretty high, over 5%. And these aren't property taxes, so there's sort of no compression impact with income, food and beverage, or the next two that I'll talk about. So since 2014, a number of cities have enacted sweetened beverage or soda taxes. And the idea behind the soda tax is kind of like the idea behind cigarette taxes. So it's kind of in part to curb unhealthy buying. And then often revenues are used for things that encourage better health. So parks, trees, programs, community gardens. Cities on the West Coast that have adopted this tax include Seattle, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, and then Boulder and Philadelphia also have them. Generally, these have been approached as kind of like a tax by ounce of sweetened beverages. And then other cities we looked at kind of vary between 1 to 2 cents per ounce. It's usually paid by distributors, but they can and generally do pass the costs on to buyers. And in 2019, actually, Trust for Public Land helped us estimate the revenue that could be raised in Portland with a 1% per ounce tax, so on the lower end. But escalated to 2023, it could bring in an estimated of $19 million a year. This one isn't something that we have collected previously, so we would need to set up kind of a new mechanism in place to collect it. And this is also one where there's not a super long history from other jurisdictions to get a sense of growth rate or volatility. But Philadelphia indicated just over 5% volatility, and San Francisco noted a downturn in recent years, generally due to COVID. So pretty high volatility potentially on this one. And they also indicated negative growth rates, in part because the purpose of these are really to curb the buying behavior. So I think in Berkeley, for example, sales of sweetened beverages went down about 10% in the first year that this tax was in place. City of Chicago and Cook County in Illinois both have something called an amusement tax. And Chicago's actually started as a tax on in-person amusement, so like sports, theater, concert ticket sales. But they expanded their interpretation to also include digital amusements, so like Netflix subscriptions, Apple, Spotify. That was not surprisingly, perhaps challenged legally, but it's actually been upheld. So a pretty rough scaling of Chicago's 9% amusement tax to Portland's population indicates it could have pretty significant revenue potential, around $46 million annually. There's only a couple examples of this tax existing, and they're both pretty new. So there's only 5 years of past revenues to look at for those other two examples, which, given the short window, really wasn't enough to do a very good guess around volatility and growth rate. They did see revenues take a hit during COVID, largely, probably due to the in-person side of that. We also don't have, a mechanism yet to collect that tax, so we would need to put that mechanism in place, which sort of would add cost and time before any revenue could be collected on that new tax. So I'm going to stop here. That's really the end of sort of the presented materials, but in the time we still have, which I think we have about 15 minutes, I was really hoping to answer any questions you have about these as funding options and also get your feedback on these as funding options. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see hands and see you all.
All right, commissioners, questions, thoughts, reactions? Bruce?
Is coffee a sweetened beverage?
I think we would have to define, but I would imagine if you're buying like a pre-packaged coffee with sugar in it, it could be.
Where I was going, I think that would be a wonderful thing to put a tax on. And I think it's more of a growth industry locally than perhaps sweetened beverages. That, beer and wine.
Melinda?
Actually,
Yeah.
can I just respond?
Go ahead.
One thing that is interesting in Oregon, I hear you on the caffeine tax, there you go. On the beer and wine, we're actually preempted from taxing alcoholic beverages in Oregon. So maybe not the beer and wine under current statute, but caffeinated, I think, is fair game.
I would just look at my only concern with some of these is the broader idea of equity, where we have certain populations who are in food deserts, and that's the only thing that is hard with the soda tax, is that sometimes it's a poverty tax or a food desert tax, and so that I love the health implications of, hey, in 10 years we're not drinking as much, but initially that's my concern with that one. And anything to do with property taxes also are an equity issue, because we already have existing very high property taxes. People are being priced out of aging in place, retiring in place because of specifically about property taxes. And then I'm all for the income tax, the higher income. I think that makes a lot of sense as far as an equitable approach. And that's just my my first impressions. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Melinda. Leah? Unless Sarah, do you want to respond to that or move on to Leah?
Great feedback. Thanks.
Melinda kind of took exactly what I was going to say, but I'll say it because I think it's good to hear from more people. I agree. I think a flat tax is always going to be felt more by lower income folks. And so I'm all for looking at those progressive options, and agreed about the property taxes. We do tend to put a lot of things, since we don't have a sales tax in Oregon, it kind of does put a lot on the property tax, and we recognize like folks are super privileged to be homeowners. And there's also that additional issue of, like Melinda said, some folks are struggling to keep up with all of these increasing costs, especially if they're on a fixed income. So I'm all for the progressive taxes that really do kind of seek to address the income inequality issues that we're seeing, and to make a better city for, for all by looking at it from that perspective. So yeah, agreed with Melinda.
Great, thanks, Leah. Megan?
Thanks, Sarah. You're always such a great presenter. I would just highlight, rather than getting into the specifics of each of them, I definitely think that there is an interest in more permanent options, right? I'm sure you all also, and having been on the BIC, I think going to voters every 5 years creates a sense of exhaustion as well, and opposition. So I think making permanent options, and I think just to hark back beyond the options to the timeline, I really appreciate the idea of a pilot, but I want the pilot, I just have to highlight this, for street tree maintenance to move us toward a permanent citywide option rather than just a pilot option. So I think that within whatever timeline we create, we have to figure out how we're going to make this our city's strategy, because if not, we're not going to hit our climate crisis goals. So I just want to highlight that a pilot is merely a way to get us to a permanent solution. It's not kind of our solution.
Thanks, Megan. Melinda, and then
Yeah,
Adrian.
I just forgot one note about the amusement tax is that it's not just people who can afford to go to, ball games and stuff. There's so many service fees on tickets already that it's already a discouraging thing to sign up for, the symphony or to support the arts. And I'm always amazed at how many service fees are tacked onto those. And so that's just kind of another discouraging thing about participating in supporting arts, or whatever your amusement is. But for me, it's specifically making arts available. It's already hard for me to dish out those ticket master fees. So that's
Great, thanks, Melinda. Adrian.
Yeah, I wanted to second Megan's sentiment on it, looking for a more permanent solution. Just watching what has happened actually with Portland Parks and Rec, and the need to become an employer of choice. I'd have to ask Jen if that's the same with Urban Forestry Commission, but with Urban Forestry, but this sense that even employees get that this is sort of a fly-by-night operation. Who knows? They're always crying for money, and I think it makes it harder to get career employees and to build a program that is really future-facing and optimal. And yeah, just that infrastructure that's needed too to keep getting the money is hugely expensive. So
Thank you, Adrian. Daniel?
Thanks. Thank you, Sarah, and also Todd, who I know has been working on this a lot. I guess, first of all, there's no easy solution here. So I do appreciate all the work that's going on. It's really tough. I want to make a comment, kind of stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. So we've got some needs that are identified, and I feel like there's been a lot of discussion and focus on the revenue side and not enough on the cost side. And what I mean by that is when you look at, for instance, the deferred maintenance backlog and looking at potential solutions like bonds, what the bond is going to do is help with the deferred maintenance now, but assets are constantly deteriorating. So there's always going to be a need. You're going to have to keep doing bonds every few years or whatever, unless we decommission or allow to deteriorate intentionally some of the assets. I think we have a big long-term mismatch between the assets we have and our ability to fund maintenance. And it occurred to me that when you were talking, Sarah, about potentially trying to get changes to state law for the city council
The
being
district.
allowed, the district, I think there's a big need throughout the state of Oregon to make changes to the state laws about how SDCs are allowed to be used. I think that, and this is just my opinion, but I think a lot of the problem that a lot of municipalities in Oregon have gotten into with deferred maintenance is because SDCs are allowed just to build and work on capital projects, but they're not allowed to be used for operation and maintenance. And I think that Portland and other municipalities have seen this as a great way to grow their infrastructure, but kind of kicking the can down the road about how to pay for operation and maintenance. So I would like to propose it, you think about maybe building a statewide coalition to get the laws changed about SDCs so that operation and maintenance can be part of it. Because, when we as individuals buy things, we're also hopefully thinking about how are we going to pay for operating and maintaining them, right? I think that the public sector should do that too, but we're prevented by this structural law. So please consider, if you're going to be looking at changing state laws, this is a big one that I think needs to be changed.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments, Daniel, as always. And just on the last point, I actually used to manage the system development charge program for parks. So I feel compelled to just check in on that one. About 50% of states nationally have some form of SDC or impact fee program. And the purpose of those as impact fees is really to collect fees from new development to pay for sort of the impact they're having on the system. And so the connection between collecting those fees and then using them to expand the system has allowed it to be used for that capital growth category. The share though of paying for the operations and maintenance and even the deferred maintenance then would come in as those properties are paying property taxes like everyone else. And so having an impact fee is asking some portion to pay for sort of higher operations and maintenance, but without a connection that they're actually causing higher operations and maintenance than anyone else, again, because they would be paying property taxes like everyone else. So I think I hear you, and I think hopefully we can look at broadening our tools because that one, I think as a fee, not a tax, has a pretty clear connection for how a fee can be used and what the impact is there.
And well, Daniel, maybe, I was just going to add, maybe this is what Sarah's saying, I'm just saying it in a different way, is maybe what you're saying is we need an operation and maintenance fee that's authorized at the state level that local jurisdictions can assess. Right now, it seems like our bigger options are related to ballot referrals, and then you have to pass something in at the ballot box. But maybe what you're asking is allowing local jurisdictions to assess a fee that doesn't require ballot approval. I don't know if that's what you're suggesting, because the Parks SDC program doesn't require ballot approval.
I actually was thinking that this is probably would be a statewide effort to get voters to approve it, a ballot thing. And I understand what you're saying about sort of intellectually the way, SDCs are associated with, not with maintenance and, with the impact, but I really think realistically impacts continue, they occur for a longer period of time. And so it just makes sense to me that this could solve some big problems if, voters would go along with this and say, hey, we recognize that the impacts are longer and that operation maintenance, if you build a new park, the park's got to be paid for the maintenance. So, but anyway, to answer your question, Todd, yes, I was thinking going to the voters statewide and building a coalition, hopefully with other municipalities that are running into the same issues as Portland are, because it's not just something that Portland's running into. So anyway,
yeah, no, it's great. No, it's great thoughts. And the reality is it's not something unique just to parks, right? The state of Oregon and local jurisdictions have a public finance problem, right? There's a meta problem here in Oregon.
All right, thanks, Daniel, Todd, Sarah. Bruce, you want to bring us around the corner and wrap this up?
Sarah, what's the estimate of annual additional funds needed? I mean, what kind of amount are you looking for between the combination of levies, bonds, fees, whatever? I mean, what's Parks thinking?
Yeah, so on the operating side, we currently have it with the levy, but we're looking for about $55 million more annually to continue providing that level of service. And again, that's about a third of our operations. And on the capital maintenance side, about $55 million as well, for totally different reasons, just happens to be the same number. But that's an amount that would allow us to really get to sort of a level of good practice and buy down our deferred maintenance backlog in about 15 years. That totals to about 110. If we were adding sort of the citywide street tree maintenance approach that we spoke about earlier, that was $20 million. So that would be $130 million annually. And again, for the next 4 years, we have that levy amount. So yeah, that's where we are. Well, I just wanted to really appreciate all of your comments. I think this was a great discussion, and I, again, took a lot of notes today and got a lot of great feedback. So thank you once again for allowing me to share some time with you this morning. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I know thanks, Daniel, also for your participation on this as part of the UFC. It's really, as somebody who's dabbled in economics, it was a crash course in public finance for me when I ran it, when I participated in this last time. So really appreciate all the complexities that this creates. And of course, the kind of focus I keep thinking about is the need there. It sounds like it's a pretty justifiable set of needs that are put forward. Many of the commissioners are bringing up comments about the implications of these different strategies. And so where we are with the conversation sounds like it's about the approach that's being kind of put forward here, and what is the general consensus. So is the just real ending question is the next step for Director Long? Sounds like Director Long has a lot of this feedback. You're going to bring potentially more feedback from the commission today. Is the idea to then with kind of discussions across city management to decide on something in the coming months, or is that the next step here?
Yeah, so we have a couple of conversations with City Council coming up. Again, one is kind of as part of the presentation of our levy annual report, and then again in January as part of a citywide conversation around assets more specifically. Director Long and Commissioner Rubio are going to be taking in all of this input, and we'll be looking at sort of how we can support future City Council conversations about potentially moving something forward. I don't know if you want to add anything, Todd.
No, that's great. I'll just highlight Megan highlighted encouraging everyone to vote. Healthy democracy is going to be important here, and council needs to hear, whether it's this one or our future council, of like, both your feedback on, I think someone was describing the costs of the services we provide, whether it's street tree maintenance and other services that parks provide, but then also at what scale and how we fund those things. So like your continued engagement and all the ways that you're engaged with the city is going to be really important, especially if we have charter reform coming up. So the city's, I think, going to have its hands full over the next couple of years during a pretty big transition. But at the same time, we're trying to call the question from parks and provide different options to the council of opportunities to invest more in parks. And I know for those of you who track this kind of thing, I think you might know the Fire Bureau has also been, investigating about how they improve their infrastructure as well through a possible ballot measure. So there's a lot of things that are still up in the air, and I think your continued engagement is going to be important to help kind of provide feedback to council of where the community should go next.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Adrian, I see your hand up. Do you want to close this?
Yeah, just real quickly. So, given that there's no really one ideal funding solution, as Dan mentioned, that to get a parks district that really would meet the needs, it would change, we need to change the law and that type of thing. Are you looking at a phased approach? I mean, I'm sure you are. We're obviously trusting this committee that is really, looking at things in much more detail.
Yes.
No.
Sorry.
No, shorter and longer term.
Yes, absolutely. So I think while it would be great if we could identify the one tool and get it in place that solves everything, I think we are also open to the more realistic approach, potentially that this would be sequential. And as you point out, phased, there might be some shorter term steps with some longer term things on the horizon. Yeah.
And as you can imagine, right, it's very political, right? And this is gonna, if we're talking about going to a ballot, it's about what voters in Portland are willing to support, both in a short term and a long term. So, whether it's polling at some point will be an important element, both to determine what voters are willing to support, but that needs to be close to when council's ready to refer something as well. And I think maybe we talked about it last time, but for instance, for a November 2023 ballot measure, whether it's for parks or anybody, it needs to be referred by council in July. So that means, we have a work session in January. We should come out of that work session, hopefully with some guidance, because there's really only a short number of months if we want to try to have anything on the November 23 ballot. Otherwise, you just kind of keep rolling forward. The next time deadline would be January for the May 24 ballot. Repeat it again every year.
Thanks again, Sarah. Thanks, Todd. Very it helped. Thanks for receiving our input, considering it, and looking forward to staying in touch about where this goes. There's a lot of work to be done, clearly, with internally as well as then with the community, with the broader city residents. So thanks again for coming in. Lots of great stuff for us to think about.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, commissioners. I'm gonna, if you need a potty break, please take one. We're powering through here. We're at a big picture thinking right now in terms of questions about deferred maintenance, questions about how do we maintain street trees. Many of these things have not been have not been lost on us. We've been keeping some level of connection to all of these conversations. Just like to remind you, and for the last about half hour, I'd love to have us transition into discussion of priorities, which we've been kicking this can down the road a bit. And I'd love to get us, we're missing a couple of folks, I think, today. Nevertheless, let's just keep kind of moving into this conversation of priorities. So I'm going to facilitate a conversation here about priorities. And I really want to just start by reminding you all that we had really landed in our June retreat. We landed on 5 priorities, right? So that was something we all came to, said, yay, this is good. Let's keep digging into this. And it was about, not in any order here, but increasing engagement with community was one. I'll put these in the chat, or maybe, I don't know, Brian, you have them easily accessible while I'm trying to think through this stuff. Increasing engagement with community, identify priority changes to Title 11, participate in updating the urban forest management plan, advocating for city maintenance of street trees, and reviewing and updating the structure of the UFC. Those were 5 things that we landed on. I just want to remind you of those. We'll get those in the chat here in a minute. And we've made, I just also remind you, we've made enormous progress on these items. Like the fact that we submitted a letter to commit to mayor and council around the PSEF work that's happened. We've been engaging with Commissioner Rubio's office and kind of nudging on this and really trying to move on this urban forest management plan, as well as the city maintenance of street trees. Those have been two big items that we now have seen a lot of movement on, which is very exciting and really important for us to, in many ways, celebrate and recognize as work that the commission has been participating in. So the urban forest management plan and the street tree maintenance piece are active projects right now. So I don't want to put a check mark next to those, but I do want to recognize those as like, let's set those aside for right now. And let's, at least what I want to offer or propose to you, let's set those two aside. Those are tied to the prioritizing Title 11 amendments as well, right? The high priority. The urban forest management plan will be engaged in that process, as Jen was reporting in the Forester's report earlier today, that we'll be actively engaged on that. There's conversations happening, as I understand, within urban forestry about where, how, when, all the details about engaging commissioners with the urban forest management plan. So that's in the works. That sets the policy framework essentially for moving into Title 11 code changes. So those three items, Title 11 changes, which just passed recently, some of the more, what do we call, modest changes, I guess, to Title 11 that we just heard pass City Council recently. Urban forest management plans in the works, and city maintenance of street trees is in the works. So those three things really have been front and center for us for quite some time, and they have now got wind in their sails, are kind of charting new territory as we speak. So the thing that's remaining, as I would kind of narrow the scope for our conversation a little bit, and what I want to present, or at least propose that we spend a little bit of time on, is increasing engagement with the community. What that means, that came up in the retreat again, to remind you, and then review and updating the structure of the UFC. So I'd mentioned both these items earlier today, and so I want to bring us back to those two items, which as I think about kind of what 2023 could hold for us to make some progress on, what of these two do we want to spend our limited time, energy, effort on? So that's the big question. What does it mean to be increasing engagement with community? What is community? I have a bunch of notes here, questions that I want to pose to you, but essentially, what does that mean? What does it look like to engage community? Is it done separately? Is it done collectively? Which community are we talking about? It's a very broad priority. And then the second piece, review and update the structure of the UFC. I'm a fan of letting kind of the form of this, meaning the structure of the UFC, follow the function we'd like to really pursue and kind of organize around the thrusts that we would like to see as the areas of where the UFC, we had just to kind of recollect, we had a little conversation earlier, I think it was Megan who brought up the idea of a street tree maintenance task force or something like that could keep the momentum going on one of these priorities. And if that's a structural way of thinking about the UFC, we have a fair bit of, from our bylaws, we have a fair bit of autonomy in terms of what are the specific committees or task forces or what are working groups, whatever we call them, in order to see specific priorities move. So I want to open it up there. I've talked a lot here, but I wanted to just tee it up with community and increasing engagement community and updating structure. I might, just for organization, I might want to kind of maybe do 15 minutes of each, since we have about half hour on this, and spend about 15 minutes. I want to be taking notes. We'll have some minutes as well to chew on, but the idea here is first maybe thinking about the community. We used to have a education and outreach subgroup for those newer commissioners on our commission, and that is no longer, but we did hear that. I know we have some differences of opinion on this as well, so I'd love to just flesh this out a little bit more with some maybe go around the squares here, the rectangles here, and just check in with you about this idea of engagement with community, what it means to you. Are there specific communities that you're thinking about as you think about our work? Is it done as individuals, as commissioners, and we go out and kind of check the pulse of the community that communities we're involved with, or like what form could that take to fulfill and flesh out this priority a little bit? So does that sound like an okay process? Let me pause there. Okay. Seeing a couple of nods, some smiles. All right, so I will go ahead and open it up. Yeah, so thoughts about increasing engagement with community. That was something that came up. I know, yeah, let's go around. Maybe I see Adrian, do you want to kick us off, and then I can go around to Melinda, Megan, Leah, Daniel, Bruce, Ivory.
Yeah, so I think my initial reaction is that engaging with community, we certainly want to get as much input as we can from the community on important topics that are happening. I do actually commend us that we get so much more community comment than, for example, Portland Parks and Rec does, even though they have a much broader scope. So it's cool that everyone's interested in trees and we actually get folks to come. But being more strategic about that, to actually invite folks or organizations when we're taking up certain important topics and not just be passive about it. So that's one idea. The idea of us having a subcommittee that might be winning if it makes sense from a functional standpoint. But really, I think it's very likely that our impact as board members would be fairly minimal because we're just a few individuals. And so it's more about thinking, what is the broader strategy that urban forestry has with engaging community? And what does that look like now? What could it be? And how could we better advise on that? This really kind of came to the fore for me when all these monies are coming down the pike. Like the last thing we talked about, I keep misnaming it, but the climate funds that we were just involved in, discussing with city council. Those are going to be very high risk projects, the way that that's built. And, any of these projects coming down the pike that are going to be in federal funds or state are going to be very high risk projects if we get the high risk communities involved in the way that we want to. So how is urban forestry sort of aligning itself to best, number one, get the funding and support the folks that we want involved? Sorry, that was a big comment there.
That's great, Adrian. Yeah, they are. Just thinking about what will land and alignment between commissioners' interests and urban forestry, as we've been hearing from Jen and the team about what is it that is important for their particular agendas coming up here in urban forestry management plan, as we talked about, Title 11, street tree maintenance, etc. So thanks, Adrian, that's helpful. Melinda, can I go to you?
Yeah, so my community that I think would be really helpful to engage would be professionals who are actually specifying street trees and interior trees. So landscape architects, that especially with the code updates, that these are professionals who are in that all the time, that we're either gathering information from them or educating them on street trees and the trees that are best, getting feedback on what works for them, why they're specifying certain things. I think it's just an opportunity both for the code update and kind of the longevity of what species actually survive well and will thrive in the next several decades. So that's my 2 cents.
That's great. Thanks, Melinda. Yeah, we keep coming back to that. There's so much emerging research on this too. It's just, yeah, it's a really interesting area of conversation. And definitely something that we could think about is how learn more about from urban forestry, what is being considered internally. Megan.
Oh, I have complicated feelings about this, and I'll just lead with this. I think that when this was brought up during our retreat, it was really thought of through an equity lens, which I so deeply value, but I also just really want to be aware of, as a volunteer commission, if we don't to do this effectively takes so much capacity. And I think we all know that. I do this in my job, and it is a massive part of my job, and I'm paid to do it. And so I think for us to really think about how to genuinely, deeply, meaningfully, as a volunteer commission, engage communities, wow, like I just don't want us to say and I don't think we mean this, but I don't want it to be the effect, like we checked a box, like, oh, we had conversations with communities of color. To really do that, I think in the way that we're saying as a commission, I would just think a lot of thought would need to be put into that. And then there would need to be a dedicated effort to really do that meaningfully. And I think that, urban forestry staff certainly know that and do that in their job. And again, they're also paid to do that, right? So I guess my just thought that I can't not say around this is, if we're going to do this, we really think about how, I think we would really need to dedicate how we're doing that and have people dedicated to really doing that. Otherwise I think we're going to be ineffective and fall very short of the intention.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, big lift for sure. That's why there was a subcommittee on the commission before for some of this type of work anyway. But Leah. And then we'll go to Daniel, Bruce, and Ivory.
I think that's a really good point, Megan. I appreciate that. It does take a ton of work and a ton of time and relationship building, which that by definition cannot happen quickly or easily. So I think the other thing that's on my mind is just, we do have public comments, which is amazing and wonderful. And I think this is always a problem with democratic processes, is the people who have the time, awareness, language, that they're comfortable with an English speaking me, all of these issues, right? The barriers. We hear from a certain slice of our community, but we don't hear from everyone at all, not even close. And so that's something that's on my mind too, is Adrian mentioned inviting people to come speak, or just how, I don't know how we could be more proactive about making space and inviting folks but again, I think it's that relationship building that has to happen where, we're also keeping them updated on what's going on. And so there's that two-way. So I don't know the answer, but I think those are all just important pieces for us to be thinking about.
Thanks, Leah. That's great. I agree. Just a quick note on this so far. It could mean as much as recognizing the enormity of the lift here to do this effectively. It could mean just really getting the Forester's report to identify aspects of what community engagement is looking like right now from urban forestry's perspective. That could be something that commissioners are, looking for information around, rather than creating entire subcommittees and things like that. So just really opening up the possibilities here. Daniel?
Thanks, Vivek. Yeah, a couple things, both about capacity and doing outreach. So we're a commission of, when we're fully staffed, 11 people, and we're all volunteers. So there's only so much time we're gonna have. And so if we're thinking about doing something new that we're not doing right now. We're going to have to come up with more capacity. And I think that's going to mean bringing in people who are not commissioners, kind of like what we do on the policy committee, to take a more active role in the commission. But doing that outreach in itself is also a task. But I think we do need to think about capacity before we think about starting new groups. I mean, it's something I think we can do, but let's bring more people in to assist us and help us. And, you know, whether we do something or we're advising urban forestry on how to do something, that's also another issue, because I think realistically, we can't take on really huge things as volunteer commissioners with a few hours a month. The other thing about outreach, since this is something that I do a lot in my day job, doing outreach to the community, Leah, what you said really resonated, because, you know, for us, it's taken sometimes years to build authentic relationships with other groups, especially with underserved community groups who feel like they've really been given the short end of the stick by mainstream groups. It really takes a long time to build those relationships. And the pivot I think we need to do is, if we want to engage more people, we can't say, come to us, come to our meetings. You got to go out to people where they already are. That's like the key to doing effective outreach. So if we do want to do more, we need to think about how we might do that, how we might go out to people where they already are, so that we're not asking for additional time. Thanks.
That's great, Daniel. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Bruce, and then Ivory.
I think if we want to take on something new, that means we need to take off something else. There's a limited time. And just like when Daniel was talking about limited revenues, opening new parks, do we shut facilities? We choose, or it's chosen for us, how our time is to be spent. And if something rises in importance, then perhaps we choose, we need to find time for that, and something else falls back. I don't have the answers for that, but if we believe that the most important thing for us to do is to broaden our community outreach, then in really believing that, then we're saying, okay, then this something else has to fall back. Maybe we don't hear from PBOT on their pedestrian design guide. I don't know what it would be, but there's limited time, and we may have some choice as to what we put that time into. It's possible we don't have a choice. But so though I would like to see more active community engagement and a plan where each commissioner reached out to different groups or organizations, and then we had a place where all that information was pooled, that takes a lot of time, and that may not be time people have because it's being used for something else. So that's my comment.
Okay. Thanks, Bruce. Ivory, I see you have something in the chat as well. Encourage folks to take a look. Oh, you're muted. Oh. Oh no. Is it just me? I can't hear you. Oh, bummer. Yeah, we see you unmuting, and you can clearly hear us, but it doesn't look like it's working from your side. Okay, we'll come back to you. Is that fair? Okay, sorry about that. One thing that's coming up for me, just really briefly, is maybe part of this community engagement piece, and I'm thinking about our former community education outreach, Catherine Murchell, and I'm also thinking about Ann Jeanette's comments during the retreat about how important community outreach is. And maybe part of it is, I know Parks and Rec already have quite a bit of outreach and staff that focuses on this work. Maybe commissioners hearing about the kind of work that is happening, that we heard also today about the planting a more equitable forest project and updates to that. It might be so much as just asking for kind of what is Parks and Rec doing in this area of outreach? Are we translating, like what is the work that's happening there? Are trees showing up in the feedback we're getting? What are the priorities? I think all this will really matter as we start building up towards that urban forest management plan conversations and having really good touch points with communities in order to be able to give feedback to the city about what we're seeing as really important in terms of plan development and plan components. So those are just some things that are coming up for me as I'm hearing you all in kind of what you're seeing as important with this community piece. I'd like to move on I'd like to move on quickly, and Jen, I see your hand up. The second piece is really about the structure, but before we go there, let me just check in. Jen?
Yeah, thanks for the robust conversation. I just wanted to mention something that hadn't been brought up, and that is we do have as a goal in urban forestry, and it has been reflected, I think, over the years in the commissioners on the Urban Forestry Commission, is we are trying to get more commissioners who reflect the breadth and depth and the knowledge of the whole community. And I'll tell you, there's a big change from when I first came into this role for what we have now. So thank you all for your service. And again, Vivek and Roberta are helping select new commissioners to send forward in the process. And thanks to Brian, who spends a lot of time on recruitment. And that's an area we also could talk about at meetings, like how do we do that and get more folks who can bring that perspective right into your meetings every time.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Ivory, is your?
Yeah.
Oh, good. That's
Can
good.
folks?
Yep.
Okay, I switched to my phone, so hopefully just bear with me if it's not the perfect connection. Yeah, I agree with the comments of my fellow commissioners. We do have to carefully invest the limited time that we have. So since I'm newer to the commission, I've just been absorbing more of how we operate, and it seems to me that one of the key points of us being on the commission is that we're representing the community, different aspects of the community. So as far as the question goes, I'm thinking maybe with the limited time that we have, we could focus on leveraging our existing kind of grassroots type relationships in our existing spheres of influence, rather than like mobilizing us to do outreach if that's not what we already do, like in our 9 to 5. Maybe we could look at leaning on existing media packages, social media type, whether it's graphics or sound bites or videos, or just something that we could quickly grab and then share it with, let's say, whatever social media accounts we have, whether it's LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok or whatever the case may be. This is similar to the type of media that I see provided by the CDC that they have on their websites. If those folks who are interested in spreading that message, they know where to go to grab like something that they can quickly post and start the conversation. I think that's just one idea.
That's great. Thanks, Ivory. Really, really helpful. Yeah, there's models for this out there already. I totally get that. That sounds like it could be a great way for us to start. So I'm hearing fair bit of like trepidation of trying to start anything new. There's a lot of things on our plates. We're got limited time. So I'm hearing pretty good sentiment, and unless any commissioner wants to like check me on this, but which I'm totally fine with, the idea of kind of not thinking about the structural change in terms of community outreach engagement at least. And so as we transition into the structure conversation, the last few minutes we have, I will say that the recruitment of new commissioners is really, I just totally blown away by like the commitment, the dedication, the clarity of the folks who want to participate on the commission. And it is really like, as I'm getting ready to kind of transition off the commission, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is an amazing group of people coming on board. You're all going to be incredibly fortunate to be working with. I actually said that I'd be happy with anybody who we interviewed. I don't think everyone can have a place, but I told Brian, like, this is really a great group. Representation wise, I think it's there. There are a bunch of criteria I was going through. Really articulate, really passionate folks about not just trees, but trees and the other things, right? So that's really cool to have a broader perspective like that. And so the recruitment's going well. I think the timeline is going to be really soon. So structurally, there's some, structurally, they're going to be landing into what we already have as appeals committee. We have appeals board, we have Heritage Tree Committee, and we have Policy Committee. So that's kind of what we're going to go forward with. It sounds like in the coming year. Daniel, I see your hand up, and then Leah.
Yeah, Vivek, you mentioned you're going to be terming out, and I'm going to be terming out at the same time. And I'm just thinking back when I first started on the commission. For my first year on the commission, I felt totally lost and kind of overwhelmed because there was so much to learn about urban forestry. And that said, I had already been on the policy committee before I joined the commission. And you and I are the most, have been on the commission the longest. We're terming out, and we're taking a lot of information with us, a lot of institutional knowledge. I think in terms of capacity, and Brian and Jen, tell me if there's some way we can do this without violating a public meetings law, but I would love to maybe have a meeting off the time schedule that we normally meet, just as a way for us, you and I, maybe to pass along information if any of the other commissioners are interested in just joining and just having an unstructured meeting where people ask questions and we can answer questions and not have it be an official Urban Forestry Commission meeting, and maybe having it during a time of day when people are meeting. Because I don't want the commission to lose all this information that you and I have that we're terming off with. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, it's important. This stuff that I remember the administrative rule when I first came on. Oh my goodness, that was a big deal when I first joined. So there's a lot of learning there for sure that I'd love to offer. So structurally, there's a new chair position. I was proposing a co-chair position. I can tell you just from my own perspective, and also my own kind of orientation, I work better, and I think the chair would work better. It's a very complex landscape to try to bring community perspectives, aligning it with city and public agency perspectives and agendas, and it's a lot to try to hold that space. So I would really encourage a co-chair model of two people potentially serving on this role. And if there are individuals who want to step forward and like to fill that role, I think the process has been, and I think that's what is to put your names forward to Jen and Brian. And I think they're going to really be trying to identify, and if Brian and Jen want to say anything more about this process, open that up, invite you as well, in terms of aligning Urban Forestry Commission work with city work. That's the process right now. I don't think we're set up to vote for a new chair. It's largely, I think, appointed by the city as the process we've gone in the past. So if there are people, and again, the co-chair might complicate it, but I do think having somebody else to bounce ideas off will really help in this position. And for times where chair is not available, and to have someone else, and we haven't really kind of thought that through fully, but let me start with Megan and then Brian.
I just had, excuse me, a clarifying question. Vivek, for a co-chair model, can we just do that? Or is there like a structural change? Maybe Brian or you or Jen knows that, like, could we just say we want a co-chair model and then we can do it? Or is there something we need to do before doing that?
Good question, Megan. I'm under the understanding that we can do it. We have a lot of autonomy in the way we structure ourselves. That's why I kind of opened this up pretty wide here. And the co-chair, like, yes, if we agree to it.
Yeah, yeah. So Title 11 says the Urban Forestry Commission will elect its own chair and adopt such rules of procedure as it deems necessary. So I think I would want to talk with our city attorney about the co-chair since it says chair, but also it allows to have your own rules and procedures. So basically, the UFC adopted new bylaws a little over a year ago. We would just update those bylaws to reflect the co-chair model. And then, yeah, Jen and I do not appoint the chair. The UFC votes on that. So.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Appreciate that clarification.
I just had one other thought too that I didn't want to get lost in this, is I know that we've talked about like longer meetings or more meetings or meetings with evening meetings. There's lots of ideas here, and I'm hopeful that we can actually move on some of them. So I don't know if that means like we could put together some proposals, like, and someone could lead on saying, I mean, I don't know, it depends on what you want, but saying, let's do 2 meetings or a longer meeting, whatever it is that we care about. And could we like then put it as an agenda item, discuss it, and potentially vote on those changes? I would want to make certain that everyone felt good about the changes, but yeah. I like action items.
That's great. Thanks, Megan. I can commit to at least putting together something short as a proposal to commissioners as a way to move this. If that's a process, that would be helpful. I could think about this in terms of what we would do from the chair, whether it's, I like Ivory's note here about whether we can't do it co-chair, we do a chair and a vice chair model, and then the committees that we're orienting around. So, and that are, well, required by code, and also that we've agreed will go forward into 2023. I think it'll give new commissioners a lot more clarity also about this is kind of the structure we're working with for now. These are some of the priorities, but here are places where we're really struggling to get some of this work done, and some of the opportunities for for taking those action items. So I'll commit to that. Is that helpful? A proposal that I'll send over to Brian, have you all maybe comment on? So we wrap up here. Thanks, Megan. That was a really helpful leap for structure. All right. Anything else then for the good of the order of our collective conversation in terms of priorities? Anything else that's missing more generally?
I loved your thinking around having more space in our meetings for the community outreach and just hearing what's already happening. So I just wanted to like, yay, I don't want to drop the issue. I think it is really important. And we do have limited time, but I think I'm personally for carving some time out for this in a way that makes sense. And like you said, maybe we don't need to duplicate what's already happening, but just like, let's hear more about it. And it'll help inform us as far as where might there be some gaps that we might want to try to fill in, if possible.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Leah.
I really liked your comment about the form following function, and, you know, instead of standing committees in certain areas, having some potential for ad hoc committees that have community members, so that, for example, if we're going to go, you know, write a letter to city council or consider, you know, supporting this or that, pulling together a group quickly that's predefined but doesn't, you know, have a standing meeting time, to kind of more deeply explore that, I think would be sort of a winning approach.
Thanks, Adrian. Those took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, that's really like ad hoc ideas seem really relevant right now because of the number of moving pieces on the board. It's a lot from what I can tell. And it sounds like at least 2 ad hoc committees I would suggest, and I've put together as a proposal. One is street tree maintenance committee, potential ad hoc. Again, couple of you, 3 of you, I don't know, a few of you, because I will likely not be here for that. And then second would be the urban forest management plan, a subgroup on that. Because we'll be hearing about it as a commission, but I think there's going to be opportunities to really engage with the city around this. So I would just at least see those emerging as 2 potential ad hoc committees. Appreciate that, Adrian. All right, we're at time here, a little over. Sorry to keep you a couple minutes, but this is great. I will follow up with some action. Thanks for entertaining this priorities discussion. I know it's a limited time, limited capacity, and I think it'll just, I think we're moving things along really well. Thanks again for all the good work, and we'll see you in November. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, Brian. Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Ashley. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you all. Take care.